Imagine you are working on a project with another producer when suddenly they start speaking in what sounds like a different language. Hey bro, can you send me the dry stems? I like your song bro, but the mix sounds muddy. Let's route everything to a bus and then add a send channel. Now, if you don't exactly understand what all of this means, don't worry, we've all been there. But by the end of this video, you'll have a sound understanding of all these important terms. So I found somebody who wants to work on my track and he had said I need to bounce the stems both wet and dry because he's using a different DAW? What is he saying? Well, first things first, DAW or DAW stands for Digital Audio Workstation and is the software one can use to make music, like FL Studio, Ableton, Logic, Cubase, Pro Tools, you name it. Now, back to your question, bouncing is the process where you export your song, typically as a single file like MP3 or WAV, or as separate files, stems, which are all the individual parts that make up your song. And these may include your drums, instruments, synths, effects, vocals, really any element or track in your song. So how should you bounce your stems? Well, stems can be delivered both wet and dry, where wet stems are the individual tracks that have effects applied to them. Think reverb, delay, EQ, compression, while dry stems on the other hand are the individual tracks with no processing or effects being applied, just like plain dry toast. Okay, got it. So I've also repeatedly heard words like bus and send. What do they mean? Okay, to understand what bus and send channels mean, we first have to understand what a signal chain is, which is a series of effects that a signal passes through. Say we have a piano, which is our signal, and we add an equalizer, a compressor, and a reverb on top of this, typically done within a mixer, then that presents our signal chain. Our piano goes through a series of effects that all change the original piano signal. Now, say we have a piano, a keyboard, and a guitar. We can decide to apply effects to each individual sound, but we can also decide to route all of these three to one channel, which is called a bus, where any effect we add is in turn going to be applied to all the signals that were routed to this bus channel, like all at once, which can be a great way to more uniformly and efficiently organize your mix. So when you refer to mix, would it be correct to say that the mix is our overall picture of the song, while mixing is all about balancing that picture, like balancing all the elements of a song together? Exactly. Okay, that makes sense, but now I still don't get what a send does. Okay, so say we have that piano from before. If we decide to route the piano signal to a send channel, we're basically creating a duplicate of the piano signal, which we can in turn process differently and independently of the original piano signal. So why would I do that? Well, the purpose of using a send is to have more creative control. For example, if we want to add a reverb to our piano, then of course we can add a reverb plugin directly to our piano signal chain, but I prefer adding it to the piano's send channel. So the send channel becomes our reverb channel. And the beauty of this is that we can now control every single aspect of our reverb, and we can also get very creative here by really adding any effect plugin before or after the reverb on the send channel. Like if we want the reverb to sound distorted, for example, we can just load a distortion plugin after the reverb on the send channel, which will distort the reverb without affecting the original piano signal. And once we're happy with the sound of our reverb, we can then blend it back in with our original piano signal simply by moving the volume fader of the send channel. Okay, that makes sense. Also, I keep hearing people say analog is better than digital. What do analog and digital even mean? Well, that's a debate that goes way back in time. So let's actually go back in time to, say, the 70s. Like imagine studios are filled with analog gear, everything is physical, and sound literally travels as an electrical signal, meaning every sound needed for your song will have to be captured on tape. And every sound is pure electricity, which gives the music a warm, rich feel with a bit of unpredictability that many producers and listeners love. Now, today in the digital era, everything happens within our computer, say in FL Studio. And the sound is no longer captured on tape, but it's now digital data, simply ones and zeros. And on the positive side, this means we as producers can simply edit, move, and manipulate audio with a single click, which used to be a lot harder back in the day when you literally had to cut, slice and glue tape to edit your songs. Now, of course, the latter sounds a bit extreme, so what you see a lot today is analog and digital being used together. Like, say you have a vintage analog synthesizer, you can just simply connect it to your computer through an audio interface where the sound is converted from analog, so it still has that analog character, to digital, like ones and zeros, so you can easily edit the digital recording of your analog synth in your DAW. So as far as the debate goes as to which one of the two is better, I'd say both analog and digital have their pros and cons. I also keep hearing this thing called Splice everywhere. What's that? I mean, that's a great tie into working digital, as Splice is a subscription-based database that has endless samples that you can use to build songs, ranging from drums, vocals, presets, to ambient recordings and much more. It's really like having access to tons of pro sounds in your pocket, which is just super convenient and can be very inspiring whenever you experience writer's block. Okay, so the other day another producer told me my song is coming out great, but the kick sounds like it's lacking a lot of punch. What do they mean by punch? I'm not looking for any problems. Don't worry. Punch refers to the power of, in this case, the kick, which is typically driven by the attack or transient, which is the very start of a sound, like that initial click or sharp part we hear. So punch really refers to how strong and impactful that transient feels in the mix. Like, it's usually important to make sure that the kick and other drums carry enough impact and power through a song to make them stand out and feel energetic. So when something is punchy, the transients are generally clear, sharp, and cut through. Which is, by the way, not to be confused with punch in and punch out when recording vocals. Say you recorded a complete vocal take and when listening back, you're like, hey, I don't like this part. Now, instead of re-recording the entire take, we'll just punch in at the specific point where the mistake was made. We re-record that section and then we punch out as soon as we recorded the part that we wanted to redo by simply stopping the recording. Ah, okay, that makes sense. So going back to our punch example, that same producer also said my song sounded muddy. So muddy refers to when there's too much information inside our low-mid frequency range, which is between 250 and 500 Hertz. Now, when something sounds muddy, it often creates this crowded and thick sound, which can sound like there's a lack of clarity in our mix. So how do I resolve that? So typically you'd fix that by opening up an EQ and attenuating some of the frequencies between 250 and 500 Hertz. But be careful not to attenuate too much here, as that may cause your song to suddenly sound too thin. Now, when someone says something sounds thin, they typically mean there's a lack of warmth or body, which can mean there's not enough presence from the low end or low mids. So if you find yourself having a sound or a mix that could use some more body, you can actually do the opposite of attenuating, referred to as boosting, which is where we exaggerate a specific frequency band to better hear a particular sound, like the 250 to 500 Hertz range, to make something sound more warm or full, or say the 5000 to 10,000 Hertz range to make something sound more bright or present. But like with attenuating, always be careful to not overdo boosting either. Okay, I've also been hearing about headroom and clipping. What are those exactly? That's a great question. So imagine a really tall person standing in a room. We can visualize our song being the person standing in the room and our limit being the height of the ceiling, with the space between the person and the ceiling being our headroom. So how is this relevant in music? Well, when we're mixing a track, we need to ensure there is enough of a ceiling before a song is mastered, which is the final step where the overall sound of a song is polished and optimized for playback across all listening devices, and where the song is also often made louder. So headroom is the amount of space we have between our output and our limit, and the ideal headroom to have is usually between like 3 and 6 dB, although it's not quite an exact rule. But by ensuring that we leave some headroom, we prevent any clipping from happening, which is when a sound exceeds our limit, which is at 0 dB. Now, the outcome is something that sounds quite harsh and not pleasant to the ear, because our signal becomes squashed, as we're effectively pushing the signals beyond its limits, which can sound something like... Which is why it's important we always have some amount of headroom, because when we're clipping, our audio signal is basically ruined. Okay, well, thank you. So, what about this thing called the Worlds Project I hear everybody talking about? Well, that's going to be future you if you keep making music and don't quit. Now, with all kidding aside, I've been both people, and it can be very challenging to work with other producers or musicians if you don't quite understand what these terms mean, as they all explain very important phenomena, processes, or sounds. Now, with that said, please let me know in the comments below if there's any terms you need help with, and I'll do my best to respond to them. Also, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel to become part of our community of musicians and music lovers, and I'll see you next time.